My brother and I were searching for a lost family cemetery, rumored to be up a forgotten fork of a West Virginia creek, a task left by our late grandmother. The GPS died almost immediately, and the paper map was useless in the tangled, steep terrain. As dusk fell, we realized we were hopelessly lost. The forest grew quiet, and that's when we saw the first one, a face carved into the trunk of a massive beech tree. It was ancient, the features weathered and stretched into a wide, grotesque smile. We thought it was just a weird folk art, a curiosity. Then we saw another, and another. Every few trees had one, all with the same unnerving, smiling expression, watching our progress deeper into the gorge. Darkness fell completely, and we had to make camp. We couldn't find a flat spot without those smiling faces staring down from the trees. We finally huddled between the roots of a large oak, building a small fire. The light from the flames danced over the carvings, making the smiles seem to twitch and move. My brother, usually the stable one, started to unravel. "They're watching us, Ben," he whispered, his eyes darting nervously. "They weren't here before. We're going in circles." I told him to get a grip, that it was just pareidolia, our minds seeing patterns in the bark. But the sheer number of them felt intentional, like markers on a border we weren't supposed to cross. The whispers began around midnight, faint, sibilant sounds that woven through the rustle of leaves. We couldn't make out words, but the tone was mocking, gleeful. My brother jammed his hands over his ears. "Do you hear that? Stop saying you don't hear it," he screamed at me, his face a mask of terror. I did hear it. It was the sound of children giggling, but distorted, wrong. The fire suddenly died down to embers, as if suffocated, plunging us into near darkness. The smiling faces on the trees seemed to glow with a faint, phosphorescent light. My own mind was breaking. This couldn't be real. This was a shared hallucination, panic-induced hysteria. It had to be. A figure emerged from between two trees. It was short, childlike, but its movements were jerky, unnatural. Its face was a blank, pale oval. It stopped at the edge of our dead firelight, and then its features contorted, stretching into a perfect, horrifying replica of the smiles carved into the trees. It was a mockery of joy, an expression of pure malevolence. Another one appeared to its left, mimicking the smile. Then another. They began to circle us, their movements a series of sharp, twitching motions. My brother was hyperventilating, and I knew I had to get us out, or we'd die of sheer fright right there. I grabbed my brother's arm and ran, dragging him blindly through the pitch-black forest. We couldn't see the trees, but we could feel them, and I knew those carved smiles were watching us flee. The twig snapping and rustling sounds behind us weren't from footsteps. It was a dry, skittering sound, like many thin legs scuttling over leaf litter. We didn't stop. We fell down embankments, waded through icy creeks, and tore through thorny thickets. The skittering and the faint, gleeful giggles followed us for what felt like miles, until we finally burst out onto a logging road, the first hints of dawn graying the sky. We were found by a logger at first light, bloody, clothes torn to shreds, and babbling about smiling trees and laughing children. No one ever found our campsite or the trees with the carvings. My brother hasn't been the same since. He barely speaks and jumps at the slightest sound. I've spent years in therapy trying to process the event, to accept it as a shared traumatic hallucination. But the therapist can't explain the scratches on our backs, thin and precise, like thorns or tiny sharp fingers. Nor can she explain the faint, earthy smell of decay that lingered on our clothes for days, or the fact that I can never look at a smiling face now without feeling a cold, primitive dread seize my heart.
I sought solitude on the Appalachian Trail after a brutal divorce, thinking the physical exertion and isolation would cleanse my mind. I'd been hiking for 3 days deep into a remote section, seeing no one. The peace was exactly what I needed, until the whistling started. It was a tune, faint and distant, something familiar I couldn't quite place. It was cheerful, but in the vast empty wilderness, it felt deeply unnatural. I'd stop to listen, and it would stop. I'd hike on, and it would resume, always keeping the same distance behind me. I convinced myself it was another hiker, or a trick of the wind funneling through the rocky gaps, a simple auditory hallucination from fatigue. The second day of the whistling, my mental state began to deteriorate. The tune got closer, now clearly recognizable as an old folk song, "She'll Be Comin' Round the Mountain." The whistling was perfect, every note precise, but devoid of any human warmth. It felt like a recording or an imitation. I started hiking faster, my pulse racing. I'd shout, "Hello, is someone there?" The whistling would immediately cease, leaving a silence more threatening than the sound itself. I was sweating despite the cool mountain air, my thoughts spiraling into paranoia. Was I having a breakdown? Was this what a psychotic break felt like? Being haunted by a cheerful, invisible whistler? I decided to leave the trail and cut through a valley to a Forest Service road, desperate to reach some form of civilization. The whistling followed. Now it was coming from beside me, just off the path, hidden in the thick undergrowth. I caught glimpses of movement, a dark shape keeping pace with me. I started to run, my pack bouncing painfully on my back, my breath coming in ragged sobs. The whistling kept perfect time with my frantic pace, never faltering, never getting out of breath. It was hurting me. The cheerful tune became a soundtrack of pure terror, shredding my last vestiges of rational thought. I was no longer a man on a hike. I was prey. I broke into a small clearing where an old abandoned homestead stood, just a stone chimney and a collapsed roof. And there, standing in the center of the ruin, was a man, or something shaped like a man. He was dressed in outdated, tattered hiking gear, his back to me. The whistling was coming from him. It was loud and clear now, echoing off the stone. I stood frozen, terrified, but also strangely relieved to see a source. Then, the whistling stopped. The figure, slowly, mechanically, began to turn around. There was no face under his broad-brimmed hat, just a dark, shadowy void where his features should have been. I didn't wait. I turned and sprinted faster than I ever thought possible, crashing through brush and stumbling over roots. The whistling started again behind me, but it was different now. Sharp, angry, and piercingly loud, right in my ears, as if the thing was right on my heels. I felt a cold breath on my neck. I didn't look back. I found the road hours later, a 2-lane blacktop that felt like a miracle. I collapsed in the middle of it, weeping. A family in an RV found me. I said I was gibbering, my eyes wide with a fear they said they'd never forget. The doctors call it wilderness psychosis, but I know what I heard. I know what followed me. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear that faint, cheerful whistling, and my blood runs cold.
My grandfather's cabin was willed to me after his sudden passing, a secluded property deep in an Appalachian hollow he always told me to stay away from. I arrived to settle his affairs, the narrow dirt road nearly swallowed by untamed rhododendron and a canopy so thick it felt like perpetual twilight. The air was dead silent, not even bird song, just the oppressive weight of the mountains. The cabin itself was a time capsule of dust and shadows, smelling of old wood and damp earth. I told myself the unease was just grief, a psychological trick of the mind being completely alone for the first time. But as I stepped onto the creaking porch, I felt the distinct, primal sensation of being watched from the endless dark tree line. The first night, the sounds began. It started as a faint scratching at the door, like a dog wanting to be let in. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs, trying to logic my way through it. A possum, a branch scraping in the wind. But the scratching became a deliberate, rhythmic tap, tap, tap. Then it moved to the window beside the fireplace. I couldn't bring myself to look, curling into a ball on the old musty couch my breath held. Just before dawn, it stopped. In the morning, I found no tracks, no broken branches, only long, faint scratches grooved into the thick, weathered wood around the door handle, too high for any animal I knew. By the third day, my sanity was fraying. Sleep was impossible. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig outside sent jolts of pure adrenaline through me. I started seeing movement in my peripheral vision, a fleeting, pale shape darting between trees. I'd spin around and there would be nothing. I began talking to myself, arguing that it was isolation, stress, maybe carbon monoxide from the old fireplace. I found myself staring out the window for hours, scanning the green gloom for the thing I knew was there. The rational part of my mind was shutting down, replaced by a raw, animal fear that this place, this hollow, was fundamentally wrong. The culmination was a voice. It was night, and I was desperately trying to light a lamp with shaking hands. Then I heard it just outside the door. It was my grandfather's voice, clear as day, raspy and weak like in his final days. "Let me in, boy. I'm so cold out here." A wave of icy horror washed over me. I knew it wasn't him. I knew it with every fiber of my being, and yet a part of my grief-stricken brain screamed to open the door. "Please," the voice imitated, now laced with a painful sob that sounded so real. I clapped my hands over my ears, rocking back and forth, tears streaming down my face, my psychological state shattering completely. I don't know what compelled me to look out the window. Perhaps my own crumbling mind needed to see the source of the torment. I peeled back the corner of the burlap curtain. It was there. A tall, impossibly thin figure, its skin a pale, sickly gray in the moonlight. It had no discernible face, just a smooth, blank expanse, yet it was tilted as if listening, and it was leaning over, its long, spindly fingers making that same tap, tap, tap on my glass pane. It stopped its tapping, and that blank face slowly turned toward the window where I stood. I stumbled back screaming and ran for the back door. I crashed through the woods blind, thorns tearing at my clothes and skin, fueled by pure, unthinking terror. I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned and I collapsed onto a main road where a passing sheriff's deputy found me babbling incoherently. They never found anything at the cabin. No signs of breaking, no evidence of an intruder. The official report suggests I suffered a severe psychological episode brought on by stress and isolation. But I know what I saw. I feel its gaze on me still, even in my well-lit apartment in the city. Some places are forgotten for a reason, and some things that live there learn to mimic, to lure, and to wait.
My psychiatrist, Dr. Bell, says I'm suffering from a severe form of body dysmorphia, fixated on the delusion that I am unraveling. She has me on Zyprexa, a heavy-duty antipsychotic that makes me feel disconnected from my own body, which, ironically, is the only time I feel safe. Before that trip, I was a thrill seeker, an avid hiker who loved pushing my limits. I set out to hike a remote, unmarked section of the Appalachian Trail in West Virginia, a place the locals warned was prone to sudden, disorienting fog and was haunted by the ghosts of a starved mining colony from a century ago. I was arrogant. I had the best gear, a GPS, and years of experience. I thought I was prepared for anything the mountain could throw at me, but I wasn't prepared for something that didn't want to kill me, but wanted to wear me. On the second day, the mist rolled in. It was exactly as the locals described: thick, silent, and sudden. Visibility dropped to less than 5 feet. I checked my GPS. The signal was dead. The compass was spinning uselessly. I was utterly, completely lost. The silence in the fog was unnatural. It absorbed all sound, including my own panicked shouts for help. It felt like I was wrapped in a thick, wet, gray blanket. I stumbled through the woods for what felt like hours, a growing sense of dread coiling in my stomach. That's when I found the cabin. It was a dilapidated, single-room structure barely standing. It should have been a relief, a shelter from the disorienting fog. Instead, the moment I saw its dark, gaping doorway, every survival instinct in my body screamed at me to run in the other direction. My exhaustion overrode my fear. I went inside. The cabin was bare except for a single 3-legged stool and a series of crude, desperate scratch marks on the walls, tally marks arranged in groups of 7. But it was the smell that was so wrong. It didn't smell of rot and mildew. It smelled of fresh-cut pine and something else. Something sweet and cloying, like overripe fruit. And it was warm. Not just out of the wind, but a palpable, living warmth, as if a large body had just left the room. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, my flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the darkness. That's when I heard the whisper. It was a dry, sibilant sound, like sand falling on paper, and it seemed to come from the walls themselves. It wasn't a word, just a sound of profound and patient hunger. I fell into a fitful, nightmare-plagued sleep. I dreamt I was standing outside the cabin, looking in at myself. But the me inside the cabin was changing. My skin was becoming pale and translucent, stretched taut over my bones. My limbs were elongating, my fingers thinning into delicate, needle-like points. I was unraveling, my human form dissolving and reshaping into something else, something tall and white and thin. In the dream, I felt an excruciating, gnawing hunger, a starvation so deep it was in my soul. I understood that this was the fate of the miners who had died here. They hadn't just starved to death. The place itself, the hunger in the land, had remade them into something that reflected their last desperate agony. They had become physical manifestations of starvation. I awoke to the sound of scratching. It was coming from inside the cabin. My flashlight beam shot across the room to the source of the sound. There, in the corner, was a figure. It was impossibly tall and emaciated, its pale skin clinging to its bones. Its limbs were too long, its joints bent at wrong angles. It was one of them. It was crouched over my backpack, its long, spider-like fingers methodically tearing through the fabric, pulling out my rations. It wasn't looking at the food. It was looking at me. Its face was a smooth, featureless canvas, except for a wide, lipless mouth that stretched from ear to ear, a black slash of pure, unending hunger. It wasn't eating my food. It was showing me what it was. It was showing me what I was going to become. I don't remember getting out of the cabin. My next clear memory is of breaking through the fog at dawn and seeing a ranger station in the distance. I was covered in scratches, my clothes were torn, and I was babbling about a white, hungry thing in a warm cabin. They airlifted me to a hospital. Now I can't trust my own reflection. Some days I look in the mirror and I see my face starting to stretch, my fingers starting to thin. Dr. Bell says these are powerful delusions, my mind reliving the trauma. But I know it's a memory of a future that almost was. I felt that change begin in my bones in that cabin. I carry the echo of that place's hunger inside me. I am terrified of being hungry, but even more terrified of what I might become if I ever truly starve again. The thing in the mist didn't want to eat me. It wanted to recruit me.
My official diagnosis
is PTSD with severe OCD. Dr. Evans says my obsession with patterns, with checking locks and windows, is a coping mechanism. My mind is trying to impose order on a world that I now know is governed by a terrifying alien chaos. I'm on Klonopin, which keeps the worst of the panic attacks at bay. I used to be a land surveyor. My job was to impose order, to draw lines on maps, to make the wild parts of the world knowable and finite. I took a job surveying a huge, forgotten tract of land in the deepest part of the Kentucky Appalachians for a timber company. The locals called the area Whisper Creek Holler and told me to stay away, that the place was wrong. I laughed it off. I had my GPS, my maps, my science. I thought I was immune to local superstition. I learned that some places operate on a logic so ancient and twisted that our modern minds can't comprehend it without breaking. The first few days were unnerving but explainable. My GPS would fail in specific areas. My compass would spin uselessly. I kept finding strange constructions deep in the woods, tripods of woven saplings, intricate spirals of river stones, and most disturbingly, animal bones, deer, fox, even a bear that had been meticulously cleaned and arranged in complex geometric patterns. It wasn't a hunter's work, it was ritualistic, it was art, it was a message, and I felt with a growing certainty that I was the intended audience. The silence was the worst part. It was a living thing. I would be walking, and the entire forest would just go dead silent, as if every creature was hiding from something passing through. And in that silence, I always felt like I was being watched from 100 different points at once. The third night, they started interacting with my camp. I woke up to find that one of my bright orange survey flags from a mile away had been planted in the exact center of my campfire ashes. There were no footprints. Later that day, I came back from a transect to find a dead crow laid on my sleeping bag inside my zipped-up tent. Its wings were spread wide, and a perfectly smooth, white quartz pebble had been placed in its open beak. This was no longer just a feeling. It was a direct communication. Something was out there, intelligent, and it was toying with me. It was showing me that it could go wherever it wanted, that my locks and zippers were meaningless. It was establishing its dominance, reminding me that I was a guest in its house and it did not approve of my presence. I decided to pack up and leave the next morning. That night I huddled in my tent, a hunting knife in my hand, listening. Around midnight, the whistling started. It wasn't a human whistle or a bird call. It was a complex melody of clicks, whistles, and deep guttural clicks, a language of the deep woods. It came from multiple directions, a coordinated conversation happening just outside my clearing. Then I saw them, not clearly, but as fleeting, man-sized distortions in the air near the trees, like pockets of heat haze in the cold night air. They moved with a speed that was not natural, darting from shadow to shadow. I felt a terror so profound it was almost religious. I was in the presence of the local gods, the spirits of the holler, and they were deciding my fate. The nightmare I had that night was a direct message. I dreamt I was standing in the middle of a forest, but I was looking down at myself from high above. I saw my own campsite, a tiny point of light. Then I saw the land around it, etched with enormous glowing versions of the same symbols I had seen made of bones and stones. They were lines of power, a map of a world that existed on top of our own. I understood in the dream that my own survey lines were a blasphemy, an ignorant scrawl across a sacred text. I saw the shimmering figures move along these lines, and I felt their ancient, cold intelligence, their utter indifference to human life except as a curiosity or an annoyance. I was a mouse drawing lines in a lion's cage, and the lion had finally noticed me. I woke up before dawn, my heart pounding. I didn't even take down my tent. I grabbed my keys and my wallet, and I ran. The whole way back to my truck, I could hear the whistling, not angry, but almost amused. It was the sound of something that knew it had won. Now I live in a city, surrounded by concrete, but the patterns are everywhere. The cracks in the pavement, the arrangement of windows on a skyscraper, the branches of a tree in the park, they all form the symbols. Dr. Evans says it's my traumatized brain seeking patterns, but I know the truth. I saw the real map of the world for one night. I understood that we live on a thin, fragile surface, and that there are older, stranger things that walk their own paths just beneath. I am no longer ordering the world. I am just checking the locks, praying the patterns I see outside my window are only in my head.